The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed beyond recognition. 3 days of relentless rain had swollen rivers, uprooted ancient trees, and carved new waterways through what had once been dense woodland. As the clouds parted and sunlight filtered through the remaining canopy, a solitary figure made her way carefully along a muddy path that hadn't existed a week earlier. Liz wiped sweat from her brow, adjusting the heavy camera equipment hanging from her shoulders. As an environmental photographer for the regional newspaper, she'd seen her share of natural disasters, but nothing quite like this. The normally quiet coastal forest had become a chaotic maze of fallen trees and unexpected ponds. Just a few more shots of the flood damage and I can head back, she muttered to herself, checking the fading light. She'd promised her editor photos documenting the storm's impact by tomorrow morning, and the 4-mile hike back to her truck would take at least an hour. Pushing through a tangle of broken branches, Liz froze. Her brain couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. There, rising impossibly among the trees, stood the massive white hull of a cruise ship. "That's not possible," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate against the impossibility before her. The vessel towered above the forest canopy, its gleaming white sides contrasting sharply with the green and brown of the surrounding woods. It was completely intact, as if someone had carefully placed a full-sized cruise liner in the middle of a forest, nearly 15 miles from the nearest coastline. Liz raised her camera with trembling hands, the familiar action grounding her as she captured the surreal scene. Through her lens, she could make out the name painted on the hull, Aurora Borealis. "The Aurora Borealis," she said aloud, trying to recall where she'd heard that name before. Then it clicked. The famous missing cruise ship that had vanished without a trace 3 years ago, taking over 2,000 passengers and crew with it. The disappearance had sparked international headlines, massive search operations, and eventually, countless conspiracy theories. And now somehow it was here, nestled among pine trees and oaks as if it had grown there. Liz circled the enormous vessel, noting how undamaged it appeared. There were no massive gouges or signs of impact that would suggest it had been carried inland by a tsunami or other catastrophic event. The ground around it showed no signs of having been disturbed by something of this size being dragged through the terrain. It was as if the ship had simply materialized in this spot. As she rounded the stern, she spotted something even stranger, what looked like a makeshift dock leading to one of the lower service entrances. Fresh footprints in the mud suggested someone had been here recently. Her journalistic instincts overpowering her fear, Liz approached the crude wooden platform. The service door was ajar, hanging slightly open as if inviting her in. "This is either the story of a lifetime or how I end up as a cautionary tale," she muttered, pulling out her phone. No signal as expected this deep in the woods. She hesitated, then opened her camera app and recorded a quick video. "This is Elizabeth Chen. At approximately 6:15 p.m. on May 12th. I've discovered what appears to be the Aurora Borealis cruise ship in Blackwood Forest, roughly 15 miles inland from the coast. I'm going to investigate further. If anyone finds this phone and I'm not around, well, notify the authorities, I guess." She pocketed her phone, took a deep breath, and stepped onto the makeshift dock. The service entrance led to a dimly lit corridor. Emergency lights glowed with a faint blue tinge along the baseboards, providing just enough illumination to navigate by. The air inside felt strangely fresh, not stale as one would expect from a sealed vessel abandoned for years. "Hello?" Liz called out, her voice echoing down the empty hallway. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered her. Moving deeper into the ship, Liz found herself in what appeared to be a staff area. Crew quarters lined both sides of a wider hallway, many doors standing open. She peered into several rooms, finding personal belongings still in place. Photos, books, clothing, as if the occupants had simply stepped out momentarily. A corkboard on the wall caught her attention. Staff notices, duty rosters, and a calendar remained pinned in place. The calendar showed dates from 3 years ago, frozen on the month the ship had vanished. As Liz moved toward what she assumed was the main part of the ship, the emergency lighting grew stronger. She emerged into a vast atrium that rose through multiple decks, typical of modern cruise liners. A grand staircase swept upward, while various shops and restaurants ringed the circular space. But what made her gasp wasn't the luxury. It was what had happened to it. Plants had overtaken much of the space, but not in the way abandoned places normally surrendered to nature. These weren't ordinary vines or weeds forcing their way through cracks. These plants seemed to have been deliberately cultivated, forming intricate gardens throughout the atrium. Flowers in colors she'd never seen before bloomed in carefully arranged patterns. Vines with luminescent blue leaves spiraled up columns, providing additional light, and they were moving, not just swaying, but actually shifting position as she watched, turning toward her like curious animals tracking a visitor. What in the world? Liz breathed, raising her camera again. A soft sound behind her made her turn. A notebook lay on the floor where she was certain nothing had been moments before. Heart pounding, she picked it up and opened to the first page. The handwriting was neat and precise. Day 195. Another visitor has found us. Perhaps this one will understand. Perhaps this one will stay. Liz nearly dropped the book. The ink glistened, still wet. A rustling sound drew her attention back to the strange plants. They had moved closer, their luminescent leaves now forming what almost looked like an arrow, pointing toward the grand staircase leading to the upper decks. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Liz followed the direction indicated. The upper deck opened into what had once been the main dining hall. Now it resembled something between a jungle and a laboratory. Tables had been pushed against walls to make room for equipment she didn't recognize, surrounded by more of the strange plants. Some grew in transparent containers, others freely along the floor and walls. In the center of the room stood a makeshift desk covered with journals, scientific equipment, and small samples in labeled containers. Liz approached cautiously, flipping open the topmost journal. Pages of notes, diagrams, and observations filled the book, all in the same handwriting as the notebook that had appeared downstairs. One passage caught her eye. The merger has progressed beyond our wildest expectations. What began as a desperate measure for survival has become something else entirely. We are neither what we were nor what we might have been, but something new altogether. The ship protects us as we protect it. We have become a single system. The light suddenly brightened around her. When Liz looked up, she found she wasn't alone anymore. A figure stood across the room, human in basic shape, but with skin that seemed to shimmer with the same luminescence as the plants. Where there should have been eyes, gentle light glowed. "You're one of the passengers," Liz whispered, understanding dawning with a mixture of horror and fascination. The figure tilted its head, then raised a hand in what seemed like a greeting. Behind it, more figures emerged from shadowy corners. Dozens of them, each slightly different but all bearing the same otherworldly characteristics. Liz's camera slipped from suddenly numb fingers. "What happened to you all?" Rather than speaking, the first figure gestured to a large display screen on the wall that suddenly flickered to life. Images began to play. The ship during its final normal day, passengers enjoying their vacation. Then something changing. An experiment in one of the research labs below decks going wrong. Light enveloping everything, and then transformation. The screen went dark and the figure approached, stopping a few feet away. It held out what might have been a hand, offering something small and glowing. Liz hesitated, then slowly extended her palm. The figure dropped a tiny seed into her hand. It pulsed with gentle blue light. Without words, Liz understood. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an invitation. Behind her, the sound of voices and flashlights penetrated the quiet. Search parties from town, perhaps looking for her after she hadn't returned. The figures retreated quickly, melting into shadows and plants. Liz closed her fingers around the seed, tucking it safely into her pocket. As the search team's lights grew closer, she knew her world had changed forever. Whatever had happened here, whatever the Aurora Borealis had become, this was just the beginning of the story, and she would be the one to tell it. I've written an engaging first part of the story that introduces the mystery of the cruise ship in the forest. The narrative follows Liz, an environmental photographer who discovers the impossible. A massive cruise ship that disappeared years ago, somehow placed intact in the middle of a forest. News of the mysterious cruise ship spread like wildfire. Within 24 hours of Liz's discovery, the quiet forest had transformed into a hive of activity. Government vehicles lined the newly cleared access roads, and yellow tape marked a perimeter around the massive vessel. Men and women in various uniforms rushed about with purpose, their faces masks of professional concern. Liz stood at the edge of this chaos, clutching her press badge like a shield. Despite being the one who found the ship, Officials had been keeping her at arm's length since she'd been rescued by the search party. Her photos had made the front page of not just her local newspaper, but national publications as well. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from news networks and documentary producers, but the seed in her pocket weighed heavy, a secret she hadn't shared with anyone. "Ms. Chen?" A deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. A tall man with weathered skin and silver-streaked hair approached, offering his hand. His badge identified him as Dr. Thomas Reed, Naval Engineering Corps. "They're finally letting the press close her?" Liz asked, shaking his hand. "Not exactly." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "I've been asked to assemble a specialized team to investigate the interior, and I've been reviewing your initial photos and statement. I'd like you to join us." Liz blinked in surprise. "Me? Why?" "You're the only one who's been inside and made it back out to tell about it," he said matter-of-factly. "Plus, the beings you described seem to communicate with you. That could be valuable." Liz hesitated, her hand unconsciously touching her pocket where the seed still glowed faintly. "What exactly are you hoping to find in there, Dr. Reed?" "Answers," he said simply. 2,140 people vanished without a trace 3 years ago. Families have been waiting for closure. And now we have a ship that's physically impossible. A cruise liner 15 miles inland with no path of destruction to show how it got here. He gestured toward the massive white hull. "The scientific community is struggling with this one." An hour later, Liz found herself gearing up with a small team of 6 specialists. Along with Dr. Reed, there was Paz, a marine biologist; Hero, an expert in naval architecture; Vivian, a physician specializing in unusual pathogens; Doug, a security specialist; and Lee, a botanist who practically vibrated with excitement at Liz's description of the strange plants. "We'll maintain radio contact with the base camp at all times," Dr. Reed explained as they checked their equipment. Each person carried a backpack with basic supplies, sample collection kits, and scientific instruments. "Our primary mission is observation and documentation. Touch nothing unless absolutely necessary." Liz caught his eye. "And if we encounter the passengers?" A shadow crossed his face. "Non-hostile approach. No weapons will be drawn unless there's a clear and immediate threat." The team approached the same service entrance Liz had used the day before. The makeshift dock had been reinforced and expanded overnight. As they reached the door, Liz felt a strange vibration run through her body, emanating from the seed in her pocket. "Does anyone else feel that?" she asked. The others looked at her blankly. "Feel what?" Paz asked, adjusting her pack. "Nothing," Liz murmured. "Just nerves." The corridor beyond the service entrance looked different in the harsh light of their powerful flashlights. What had seemed merely unusual to Liz now appeared distinctly alien. The emergency lights along the baseboards pulsed with a gentle rhythm, almost like breathing. "These aren't standard emergency lights," Hero said, kneeling to examine one. "They're organic, some kind of bioluminescent material." Lee was already taking samples, his eyes wide with wonder. "This isn't like any bioluminescent organism I've ever seen." "The cellular structure is—" He stopped, looking up. "Sorry, getting ahead of myself." They moved deeper into the ship, following the path Liz had taken before. The crew quarters were as she remembered, frozen in time yet strangely preserved. Vivian took air samples, her brow furrowed. "The air quality is perfect," she said, checking her instruments. "Better than outside, actually. Higher oxygen content, no pathogens, no mold spores despite the apparent moisture." She shook her head. "A sealed environment like this should be toxic after 3 years." When they reached the grand atrium, the entire team stopped in their tracks. The luminescent garden had expanded overnight, spreading across more of the open space. The plants moved more actively now, turning toward the newcomers like curious children. "My God," Lee whispered, his scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. "They're responding to our presence. These aren't plants as we understand them." Doug shifted uncomfortably, his hand straying toward the holster hidden beneath his jacket. Liz noticed and shot him a warning look. "They're not aggressive," she said firmly. "They're just aware." As if in response to her defense, the vines nearest to Liz extended toward her, their blue leaves gently brushing her arm. The seed in her pocket grew warmer. Dr. Reed watched the interaction with intense interest. "They seem to recognize you, Ms. Chen." "Liz," she corrected automatically, marveling at the gentle touch of the plant. "And yes, I think they do." The team spread out to document the atrium, collecting samples and readings. Liz found herself drawn to the staircase again, the same pull she'd felt yesterday guiding her steps. Dr. Reed followed close behind. "You mentioned a dining hall converted to some kind of lab?" he asked as they ascended. "Yes, but—" Liz hesitated at the top of the stairs. "It's different. Where the dining hall had been was now an enormous garden dome. The ceiling had somehow been transformed into a transparent membrane that let in sunlight while the walls had expanded outward, creating a space 3 times larger than should have been possible within the ship's dimensions. That's not physically possible, Dr. Reed said, his voice faint. The exterior dimensions of the ship couldn't contain this. Inside the dome, the strange vegetation grew in organized patterns, forming what looked like living computer systems and research stations. In the center, a structure like a massive flower bud pulsed with energy, and standing around it were dozens of the transformed passengers. They turned as one to face the newcomers, their luminescent features unreadable. Unlike yesterday, they made no move to retreat. The seed in Liz's pocket now felt hot enough to burn. Without thinking, she pulled it out. It glowed brilliantly in her palm, sending shafts of blue light between her fingers. The nearest figure stepped forward, the same one who had given her the seed. It extended a hand toward Dr. Reed in what appeared to be a greeting. "Hello," Dr. Reed said, his voice admirably steady. "We mean you no harm. We've come to understand what happened here." The figure tilted its head, then gestured toward the flower-like structure in the center of the room. The bud began to open, revealing a swirling mass of light and energy within. "It's some kind of interface," Liz whispered, somehow knowing this to be true. The seed pulsed in time with the energy at the center. Dr. Reed called the rest of the team on the radio, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Within minutes, they had all gathered at the entrance to the dome, their expressions ranging from scientific curiosity to barely concealed fear. The transformed passengers formed a semicircle, creating a path to the central structure. One by one, screens around the room flickered to life, showing images from the ship's past. They watched in stunned silence as the story unfolded before them. The Aurora Borealis hadn't been just a luxury cruise ship. It had secretly housed an experimental research lab in its lowest levels, funded by a consortium of private interests. The scientists on board had been working on a revolutionary form of energy production, something that could generate unlimited power with minimal resources. The experiment had gone catastrophically wrong. A tear in the fabric of reality had formed, drawing the ship into a space between dimensions. Facing certain death, the lead scientist had made a desperate gamble, introducing a specially engineered biological agent that could rapidly evolve to survive in hostile environments. It had worked too well. The agent had bonded with both the ship and its inhabitants, transforming them into a single symbiotic entity, capable of surviving in the interdimensional void. When they finally managed to return to Earth, they were no longer entirely human, nor entirely of this world. "They've been trying to communicate," Lee said, watching the screens with wide eyes. "All this time." The central figure approached Liz again, pointing to the seed in her hand, then to her chest. The meaning was clear even without words. "They want me to be a bridge," Liz said softly. "They chose me to help them communicate with the outside world." Dr. Reed looked troubled. "Ms. Chen, Liz, we don't know what that seed is or what it might do to you." "I do," she said with strange certainty. "It won't change me like them. It's just a connection." The evacuation was chaos. Alarms blared across the makeshift government compound as personnel rushed to pack equipment and clear the area. Liz and the research team barely made it out of the ship before military helicopters appeared overhead, their spotlights cutting through the evening gloom. "Everyone to the vehicles now," shouted a commander in a black tactical uniform. 3-mile minimum safe distance." Dr. Reed grabbed Liz's arm as they ran. "Did you understand what was happening in there? Are they leaving our dimension again?" Liz clutched the seed in her palm, its glow now visible even through her closed fingers. "Not exactly. I think they're—" She struggled to put the impression into words. Adjusting, shifting somehow. Behind them, the massive cruise ship had begun to shimmer around its edges as if the boundary between it and the surrounding reality was becoming fluid. The trees nearest to the hull seemed to bend away, creating an expanding circle of distorted space. They piled into an armored transport vehicle with the rest of their team. As they sped away down the forest road, Liz looked back through the rear window. The aurora borealis appeared to be both present and absent simultaneously, parts of it transparent enough to see the forest through its hull while other sections remained solid. "This defies every law of physics," Hero muttered, his face pale as he watched. Paz, the marine biologist, was reviewing readings on her tablet. "The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases. It's as if the ship exists in multiple states at once. Quantum superposition," Dr. Reed said quietly. "But on a macro scale, impossible." "Clearly not impossible," Liz countered, her eyes still fixed on the vanishing ship. "Just beyond our understanding." The convoy reached the new perimeter where a small army of scientists and military personnel had established monitoring equipment pointed toward the phenomenon. Massive screens displayed various readings and measurements, most of which were spiking into red warning zones. A stern-faced woman in a crisp suit approached as they exited their vehicle. "Dr. Reed, your team is required for immediate debriefing. National security protocols are now in effect." She glanced at Liz with suspicion. "Civilian personnel will be processed separately. Ms. Chen is key to understanding what's happening," Dr. Reed argued. "She's established communication with the entities. All the more reason for thorough questioning," the woman replied coldly. Liz felt a rush of panic. If they separated her from the team and discovered the seed, she had a sudden certain knowledge that these people wouldn't understand its importance. They would treat it as a threat, something to be contained and studied rather than nurtured. Before anyone could stop her, Liz stepped away from the group. "I need to use the restroom first. It's been a long day." The woman frowned but nodded toward a line of portable facilities at the edge of the camp. "Make it quick." Instead of heading toward the restrooms, Liz ducked between two supply trucks and sprinted for the tree line. She heard shouts behind her but didn't look back. The seed seemed to pulse in her hand, guiding her movement through the darkening forest. She ran until her lungs burned, following an instinct she couldn't explain. The seed grew warmer, almost pulling her in a specific direction. After nearly 20 minutes of crashing through underbrush, Liz emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood one of the transformed passengers, its luminescent form casting a gentle blue glow over the surrounding trees. Liz stopped, breathing hard. "You followed me." The figure made no sound but extended its hand in the same gesture from before, over its heart, then outward toward her. "You need my help," Liz said. Not a question but a statement of understanding. The being nodded, then turned and walked deeper into the forest. After a moment's hesitation, Liz followed. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, moving away from the government compound and toward an area of the forest that appeared untouched by the recent storms. Eventually, they reached another clearing, this one perfectly circular as if carved with precision. In the center stood what Liz could only describe as a doorway made of light, a vertical oval of swirling energy, similar to what she'd seen inside the ship's garden dome. Though, being stopped before this portal and turned to Liz, pointing first to the seed in her hand, then to the doorway. "You want me to go through?" Liz realized aloud, taking an involuntary step backward, "to wherever you came from." The figure shook its head and made a more complex gesture, pointing to the seed, then to the ground, then making a growing motion with its hands. Understanding dawned slowly. "You don't want me to go through. You want me to plant the seed here?" The being nodded emphatically. Liz looked down at the glowing seed. "What will happen if I do?" In response, the figure reached out and gently touched Liz's temple. A flood of images filled her mind. The ship halfway between dimensions, the transformed passengers creating similar seeds across the world, new growth establishing a network of connection points between realities. "You're building bridges," Liz whispered. "Stable pathways between worlds." The being nodded again, then pointed urgently at the ground. In the distance, Liz could hear the faint sound of search helicopters. With shaking hands, Liz knelt and dug a small hole in the soft earth. She placed the seed inside and covered it, feeling a strange sense of ceremony in the simple act. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground beneath her hands began to warm, and tiny points of blue light spread outward from the planting spot like luminescent roots racing through the soil. The portal of light pulsed in response, stabilizing from a wavering oval to a perfect circle. Through it, Liz could now see what looked like another forest, but with colors that didn't exist in her world. Plants that glowed with internal light. Structures that seemed both organic and architectural. "Is that your home now?" she asked. The being made a gesture that somehow conveyed both yes and no. It pointed to the portal, then back toward the direction of the ship, then made a circular motion with its hand. "Both places," Liz interpreted. "You exist in both realities." The sound of the helicopters grew louder. The being looked up, then back at Liz with a new urgency. It pointed to her, then to the world beyond the portal, making a questioning gesture. "You're inviting me to see it," Liz realized. "To visit your world." The being nodded, extending its hand. Liz hesitated, thinking of her life, her small apartment, her job at the local paper, her few friends. None of it compared to what she'd discovered in the past 2 days. None of it compared to the opportunity to see something no human had ever seen before. "I need to be able to come back," she said firmly. "I can help you communicate with my world, but only if I can move between them." The being placed both hands over its chest, then extended them toward her, a promise. Hesitantly, Liz reached out and took its offered hand. The sensation was strange, neither warm nor cold, neither solid nor insubstantial, but something in between. Together they stepped toward the portal. As they approached the threshold, Liz paused, looking back at her world one last time. The helicopter searchlights were visible now, sweeping through the trees not far away. She took a deep breath and stepped through. The sensation was like passing through a curtain of warm water. For a brief, disorienting moment, Liz felt as if she were everywhere and nowhere at once, stretched across multiple possibilities. Then she was standing on solid ground again, but in a world unlike anything she had ever imagined. The forest around her resembled Earth's in basic structure: trees, underbrush, open sky, but everything pulsed with internal light and consciousness. The trees swayed toward her with apparent curiosity. Flowers opened and closed in rhythmic patterns that somehow conveyed meaning. The very air seemed to welcome her with a gentle caress. "It's beautiful," she whispered, turning in a slow circle. In this light, she could see her companion clearly for the first time. The being had once been a woman, perhaps in her 50s, with the ghostly suggestion of a lab coat and name badge still visible beneath the luminescent transformation. Her features were fluid, shifting between human and something else, but her eyes held unmistakable intelligence and warmth. Other transformed passengers emerged from the glowing forest, gathering around Liz with gentle movements that conveyed welcome rather than threat. They communicated in pulses of light and movement, a language Liz somehow understood on an intuitive level. They led her to what appeared to be a settlement, structures grown rather than built, rising organically from the ground in spirals and arches of living material. At the center stood a replica of the ship's garden dome, but vastly expanded, housing what looked like a complex research facility. Inside, screens and interfaces grew from living walls, displaying data and images from both Earth and this new reality. Liz recognized pictures of the government compound, live feeds from cameras she hadn't noticed aboard the ship, and maps showing dozens of glowing points around Earth. Other seeds already planted, other doorways being established. "You've been planning this for a long time," Liz said, understanding dawning. "The ship appearing in the forest wasn't an accident. You wanted to be found." The bright lights of the interrogation room had been designed to make people uncomfortable. Liz had been sitting in the hard metal chair for over 6 hours, answering the same questions repeatedly as different officials cycled through the room. Her wrist, where the luminescent bracelet remained hidden under her sleeve, occasionally tingled with warmth. "Let's go through this one more time," said the latest interrogator, a tight-lipped woman in a dark suit who had introduced herself only as Agent Clark. "You claim you followed one of these entities into the forest, communicated with it, and then it just disappeared?" Liz maintained her story. "Like I told the other 4 people who asked me this, yes. It led me away from the camp, showed me some kind of energy field similar to what we saw on the ship, and then vanished when your helicopters showed up." She had decided within moments of being captured that telling the full truth would be disastrous. These people weren't ready to hear about portals to other dimensions or the transformed passengers' plans to establish connection points around the world. They had already labeled the ship's inhabitants as entities rather than people who had changed. Agent Clark tapped her pen against a thick folder. "And you expect us to believe that after making direct contact with you twice, These beings simply let you go without any exchange? Liz shrugged, trying to appear more casual than she felt. Maybe they were just curious about us, same as we are about them. Dr. Reed's team reported that one of these entities gave you something. A seed of some kind. Liz had prepared for this. Yes, but I dropped it when I was running through the forest. It was glowing and I got scared it might be dangerous. I can show you approximately where if you want to waste time looking for it. Agent Clark studied her face, clearly searching for signs of deception. After a long moment, she closed her folder and stood up. You're free to leave, Miss Chen. But you'll remain under surveillance, and you're required to check in daily with our field office. The events you witnessed are classified under national security. Sharing any information, including with the press, would result in immediate arrest. Liz almost laughed at the irony. She was the press. What about my job? My editor is expecting a follow-up story on the storm damage. A cover story has been provided. The official explanation is that a military transport vessel was temporarily stranded due to the flooding and has since been recovered. Agent Clark moved toward the door. Your cooperation is appreciated. A car will take you home. 2 hours later, Liz was finally back in her small apartment. The first thing she did was check her bracelet, which had remained remarkably undetectable despite multiple security scans. In the privacy of her bathroom, she rolled up her sleeve to examine it. The luminescent material pulsed gently against her skin, responding to her attention. As she watched, tiny symbols appeared and disappeared across its surface. Not words exactly, but patterns that somehow conveyed meaning. They're waiting, she whispered to herself, understanding without knowing how. She had just enough time to pack a small bag with essentials, clothes, her camera, extra memory cards, her laptop. As an afterthought, she grabbed the external hard drive where she backed up all her work. If she was going to tell this story, she would need proof. The surveillance team wasn't difficult to spot. A nondescript sedan was parked across the street, 2 men inside trying too hard to look casual. Liz waited until nightfall, then slipped out through her building's back entrance, which led to an alley connected to the next street over. Small-town surveillance had its weaknesses. The bracelet guided her, warming or cooling against her skin to indicate directions. She followed its guidance out of town and back toward the forest, keeping to side roads and paths. By midnight, she had reached the clearing where the portal had appeared. It was gone, the area showing no sign that a doorway between worlds had ever existed. For a moment, Liz felt a stab of panic. Had she misunderstood? Had they abandoned her? Then her bracelet pulsed with new urgency. She held it up in the moonlight, watching as its glow intensified. Acting on instinct, she pressed her wrist to the ground where the seed had been planted. The earth beneath her hand warmed, and tiny points of blue light spread outward just as they had before. The air in the center of the clearing shimmered, and the portal gradually reformed, a perfect circle of swirling energy opening onto the luminescent forest of the other world. The scientist stood waiting on the other side, her transformed features arranged in what Liz now recognized as a welcoming expression. Without hesitation, Liz stepped through. They're looking for me, she said as soon as she arrived. Government agents. They know something happened, but not what. The scientist nodded, making a dismissive gesture that somehow conveyed that Earth authorities were of little concern. She led Liz deeper into the settlement than before, to a structure that resembled an observatory. Inside, a massive display showed Earth from multiple perspectives: satellite views, news feeds, data streams. Other transformed passengers worked at various stations, their movements graceful and purposeful. One approached Liz, offering what appeared to be a crystal tablet. When she took it, images formed on its surface. The government compound now vastly expanded around the site where the ship had been. They're still there, even though the ship is gone? Liz asked. The scientist made a corrective gesture, then pointed to a different image on the tablet. It showed the aurora borealis, now partially transparent but still present in the forest. The government team simply couldn't perceive it anymore. It had shifted just slightly out of phase with their reality. You've hidden it, Liz understood. But you're still watching them, the scientist nodded, then indicated Liz should follow her to what appeared to be the settlement center, a circular gathering space where dozens of the transformed passengers had assembled. At the center stood a structure that looked like a smaller version of the ship's garden dome. Inside was a nursery of sorts, with hundreds of the glowing seeds being carefully tended in beds of luminescent soil. Transformed passengers moved among them, checking each one with gentle touches. The scientist picked up one of the mature seeds and handed it to Liz, then pointed to the tablet she still carried. The display changed to show a map of Earth with dozens of glowing points scattered across all continents. "These are your planned connection points," Liz said, understanding. "Places where you want to plant seeds and establish portals." The scientist nodded, then indicated the seed in Liz's hand and pointed back toward the Earth portal. "You want me to plant this one somewhere else," Liz realized. "To start building the network." The expression on the scientist's face shifted, becoming more urgent. She brought up new images on the tablet, government research facilities, military installations, all focused on studying samples from the ship. "They're trying to understand your technology," Liz said, watching as scientists in hazmat suits examined pieces of the luminescent plants. "But they're approaching it wrong. They see it as something to control rather than connect with." The scientist made a gesture of affirmation, then showed one final image, a countdown clock, already ticking away. "There's a deadline," Liz said, feeling the weight of understanding. "If enough connection points aren't established." The scientist completed the thought by showing a simulation of the dimensional tear that had originally trapped the ship, but on a much larger scale, enveloping the entire planet. "The barriers between worlds are thinning," Liz whispered. "That's why you came back. Not just to share knowledge, but because Earth is in danger of experiencing the same dimensional shift that happened to you." The transformed passengers around them all made gestures of solemn agreement. "How long do we have?" The scientist pointed to the countdown clock again. "Just under 3 months. And how many connection points need to be established to stabilize things?" The map reappeared, showing nearly 100 locations marked with pulsing light. Liz took a deep breath, the enormity of the task sinking in. "I'm just one person. How am I supposed to plant seeds in 100 different locations around the world while being hunted by my own government?" The scientist's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile. She led Liz to another section of the settlement, where a small group of transformed passengers stood waiting. Unlike the others, these 5 still retained more human features. Their transformations were less complete, their forms less fluid. With a shock of recognition, Liz realized she was looking at Dr. Reed, Paz, Hero, Lee, and Vivian, her research team from the ship. "You brought them here too," she gasped. Dr. Reed stepped forward, his body now faintly luminescent but his face still recognizable. "We followed the same path you did, Liz. We saw the truth." "But how? When?" "After they took you for questioning," Hero explained, his voice carrying a slight echo. "The ship began to phase out completely. In the confusion, we were approached by guides." He gestured to the fully transformed passengers. "They showed us the way." "We've seen everything," Paz added. "The other world, the dimensional tear, the plan to stabilize both realities."